And then look at me. You look at me, yes.
Yeah, looking at you.
Okay.
Why would you like to make this film?
First thing I got when you asked me about this, the very first thoughts about it were that it will be something for you to remember me by. It will help you to understand me and remember me. 20 years from now, you'll be able to look at this and remember, have a better... Yeah. 20 years from now, you'll be able to look at this film and have memories from it about me. I'm 70 this year. Do you think I'll last another 20 years?
That's all you're gonna get.
That was his favourite thing to say to me. Must have been his favourite thing because he said it so often. Monotonous regularity. You're bloody useless. That was his attitude to me. I could never do anything right. Didn't matter what I did or didn't do, it was wrong. Okay, my mother told me how she and my father met. She was working as a nanny and out walking one day with the child on the seafront. She met a group of boys. So after talking with them for a while, one of them walked her back to the house where she was working and living. And when they got back to the house, he raped her. But he didn't just rape her and then leave and never see her again. He kept coming back. He thought, oh well, you know, easy sex. That was how my mother and father met. And my grandparents, my father's parents, forced them to marry. They were both 18 at the time. Much too young to get married, but growing up with my father was difficult. We moved a lot. I went to 22 different schools. That's how often we moved. And every time we moved, everything I owned, except a few clothes, got thrown out. The reason we moved is because my father would get into trouble. He wanted to be respected. He wanted to be liked and respected. And every time he did something wrong, he would lose respect. And he would lose people's liking. So we'd move and have a fresh start, and then he could try to fool people into thinking he was a nice man again. Until he fucked up again and did something else, like beat up my mother, and he broke her arm twice. Broke her ribs. She had constant black eyes and bruises. The neighbours would see this, so we'd move. He didn't like the idea of his neighbours finding out that he was a thief, so we would move. He didn't like the idea. He was an idiot. He was a fucking moron. When my parents divorced, myself and my two sisters were sent to live with my grandparents. These were an elderly couple trying to take care of 3 young children. So my uncle decided this was not good enough, and he packed myself and my sisters up and drove us down to my mother. At the time, my mother was working in a house and had just one room, so she had nowhere for children. We slept on the floor for one night, and the next day we were taken to an orphanage where myself and my sister stayed for a few months. It was literally hell for me. After a few months there, my father came to visit, and said he would take me out of the orphanage, but I had to promise I would never contact my mother and never speak about her. So I made that promise, and it was one of the worst things I've ever done. And from that day until 30 years later, I saw my mother once when my father had a court order that forced him to take myself and my sisters to visit her. My sisters were okay, they could go in and visit. I was not allowed to. He threatened me. Unpleasant is not the word. It was so terrifying that I just don't want to remember what the threat was. So my sisters went in to visit, and I stood in the doorway and looked at my mother through the doorway and said, "I can't come in." And I was crying inside. I was depressed my whole childhood. When I was 22, I had a complete mental breakdown and ended up in a psychiatric hospital. And all the pressure lifted. After a few weeks in the hospital, I was feeling better than I had ever felt before. The day after I got home, my father told me I'd only been in the psychiatric hospital because I was a drug addict and I was recuperating. And he kicked me out. Literally told me I had to leave then. Pack your stuff and get out. That was it. So I decided I was leaving the country. I went to Norway. I left without telling any of my family I was leaving or telling them where I was going. I just disappeared off the face of the earth for them. And that's the way I liked it, and I was doing fine. Until my father died. My sister phoned me and told me he was dead. And my first reaction was, good, the world would be a better place without him. And I crashed back into another deep, deep depression that lasted me another 4 years. I hated myself. For those 4 years, I hated myself, my life. I hated everything about me. I hated myself because that's what my father would do. He would be glad that someone he hated was dead. When I was 16, I made a promise to myself, a solemn promise that I would never be like my father. If I discovered I was being or becoming like my father, I would kill myself rather than go that way. I had some very good help getting out of this depression. A good friend called Anthony helped me enormously. My depression eased and gradually disappeared. One of these techniques he uses is recalling lost memories. And the lost memory was me promising my father I would not contact my mother. I had totally forgotten it. I had wiped it from my memory. I did not want to remember that. But Anthony dug it out. The moment I recovered that memory, I could contact my mother. I went home and I wrote a letter to her. So I will be forever thankful to Anthony for putting me back in touch with my mother. This 4-year depression had another major effect on my life. Gave me huge problems with the tax. I had no energy, no enthusiasm for anything, and I just let the tax office do whatever they wanted. And it ended up after 4 years I had a huge tax bill that I had no way of paying. I'd had a meeting with the tax office and they told me that your mother had to take on some of the responsibility for my tax debt. It just devastated me. I walked out of that tax office feeling lower than I have felt in many years. I thought I was just going over and over and over in my mind. I got to Rampen over the railway lines and I thought I'll just jump out in front of a train and it will all be over. And I stood there on ramp, and I stood there on that bridge over the railway lines waiting for a train to come, so I could jump out in front of it and put an end to my misery. And while I'm standing there waiting, I'm thinking of the pain it will cause you and your mother, and how you don't deserve that. You don't deserve to have that pain. And that stopped me. Never again would I contemplate suicide. This period with Anthony, it started before I met your mum and then continued after I met your mum.
Yeah.
And it was when I met your mum and we settled down together, then Anthony and I started turning our attention to what kind of father would I be. That was, and I didn't say anything to your mum about this. She didn't know I had any problem with it. She actually didn't know that I was having doubts and fears about my ability to be a father.
What are some of the times during my childhood that you had to stop and say, what would my father do, and then do the opposite?
Reading to you at night. My father never read to me. Telling you I love you. My father never once said that he loved me. Okay.
You good?
Yeah, okay. My father never once said that he loved me. Never. There's a video of you running around the garden shaking the trees.
Yeah?
Yeah?
Yeah.
If I'd done that when I was a kid, it was... I slapped your hand once. It was a Christmas tree and you wouldn't leave it alone. You kept pulling on all the decorations on the Christmas tree. And I slapped your hand to discourage you from messing around with it, because in my warped mind, I thought I was rationalising that it was dangerous for you. It was inconvenient that you were doing it.
Yeah.
But it was your excitement and your joy at this Christmas tree, and I was wrong to slap your hand. I was wrong. When you were born, I promised I would always be here for you. And that was an easy promise to make, because when you were born and I first looked at you, I discovered what unconditional love is. I expect nothing back from you. I just want to love you. And that's what it means to be a father. I love you.
Love you too. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy with that one.
Thank you.
Oh, love you.
Did you ever regret your decision while my mother was pregnant?
No. Never for a moment. Once I had realised I'm a reasonably good person, I was all for it, 100%. Never another
Never looked
doubt.
back.
No. It was just excitement. It was pure excitement.